This is my interpretation of the Fool Tarot card according to the symbolism of the Raider White deck. Basically, all the most important pieces of symbolism are in this image. However, I added a couple of variations according to my amazing art directing boyfriend, who adds a little bit more life and personality into my paintings. So I started with 3 sketches, actually 4, but the fourth one I scrapped right away because I wasn't happy with it. And then I had my Twitch friends decide upon one of them, and it is the one where you have the gesture that you look up at him. And I simply didn't like that pose. I couldn't connect with it. So I went with the one that I could connect with the most. I had the silhouette in my head already, but I didn't have an idea of what century we were looking at here. So as soon as I had the silhouette down and the Rococo-esque idea of the Swiss Guard, I later on went into the reference stage mode to look up how exactly I'm going to paint all of these clothes. So from seams to, well, materials, I just needed to know what his clothes actually looked like. And I wasn't so far off. So I found out I was in the 16th century with the style that I was aiming for. And I also made sure that it makes sense what he's wearing for his situation. So in my head, the fool is a student that embarks on an adventure that is a very unlikely one to be won. We don't expect him to reach his goal because we think he's going to die. And that is basically the hero's or the artist's journey. If you think about it, most of us know what it is like to be looked at by society as if we're crazy and as if our choices are, well, very not wisely made. So I decided to give him a budget good enough to afford him a nice, possibly painter's hat and a vest with a shirt, clean robes, pants, nice shoes. They the shoes are, even according to the reference, they have those holes on the side in them. When I added the dog, which also is part of the original cards, I had a major difficulties of getting the idea down because I don't know how to paint dogs. But let's get back to that later. Another image that was central to the whole endeavor is one that I shot myself actually, which happened in Tyrol, Austria. I just loved seeing the valley, and I hope that one day I will actually use it for a painting, and there it is. You will notice that I'm only using it for reference and not to photo batch with. And speaking of, when I am using the dogs as reference, I might as well be photo bashing because I only know what I see. So later on, I will decide to do a couple of studies of dogs just to be able to, get something down that is my idea and anatomically correct, and not something that I just copied from a photo. There's multiple rivers joining into one river in my painting, and that kind of symbolizes that there's different ways to get to the same goal. Or you can all come from the same stream, but go into different paths of life. I just like thinking about the options that one can take in life. And there's so many different ways to do that. After getting my values down, I am really reconsidering, the whole anatomy of it and the face. I'm very, very much struggling with the gesture because like I said, I don't have any reference for the gesture. I thought I will just wing it myself, but unfortunately, it wasn't that easy. Thankfully, I was at least foresighted enough to not rely on my own imagination and knowledge of historical clothing, so at least there I'm helping myself out. I have been given the advice to do warm up studies before I embark on the painting, or any painting for that matter. And I was never really a fan of studies because they're boring. But I told myself if I do a photo study according to the problem that I have at hand, for example, in this case, it would be not being able to get the face down without making it look stupid, well, then it just can be beneficial and help me. I decide I will look up reference images for Caucasian redhead men to find out how to properly shade them in shadow, because the lighting here is very tricky. There is no direct sunlight on the face the way I'm used to in portrait painting. The most that I can get from direct sunlight is the rim light, actually. So I decide to just simply really, really look at white, ginger haired skin and see how it behaves under different circumstances of sunlight. Also, I wanted to learn how to paint a very edgy young face. Edgy faces are very, very nice to draw when you have a profile image going on. And I think that's the most that I can get out of this man in this illustration, because he's looking towards the sky in front of him. So I need to get as much information conveyed in as little lines as possible. The way I approach this study is by simply starting a very rough block out with round brushes and then smudging this block out to get a bigger value mush, if you so will. And on top of that, I start refining it, always being aware of the silhouette, however, and also fixing it in post if it's necessary. Here you can see block in, smudge, blend, and refine. Those are the 3 stages that I like to paint portraits in, and it's the fastest way. The second study that I do is even more important because this one is really just focusing on the color palette when it comes to their faces in shadow. You will notice that blue is a central part of this study because, funnily enough and beautifully enough, white skin, well, it does a lot of blue and yellow and orange and a lot of saturation as well. I simply love to paint white skin, pale skin, fair skin. It's so fun. After the study, I let that knowledge sink in and go back to figuring the gesture out. I even pose it myself at some point. However, there are moments where I just want to give up and I start with a new painting instead. And, well, I find myself being screamed at by my friends who are telling me to simply not give up and polish this turd that it was at the time. It took me a very, very, very long time to finally feel comfortable enough to be content with what I have. To be honest, I'm still just content with the final image because, well, it might be the pose, it might be the point of view. Something still seems to be stiff, and I wished I was more prepared going into this painting with the perfect the perfect approach would have been to have someone dress up like that and me doing a photo shoot with them, having them walk off a chair or something. That would be amazing. But, well, it's a challenge, so I think that I've learned a lot from this. I like to figure out the gesture also afterwards by putting a gray layer on top of the whole image, tuning down the opacity, and then making a stick figure, a very dynamic stick figure on top, just to see if it would make sense if it was simplified and what I can do to bring that dynamic back into my figure. After I feel incapable of fixing anything any more than I already tried, I start a new warm up study, which is focused on the ground that he walks on. I know that I need rocks, a little bit of dirt or earth, and grass. So I took an image that basically gives me the idea. However, I quickly find myself just copying the image instead of really studying it and trying to learn how to simplify this complexity. So I decide to quickly finish this one and take another image that I basically just cut out and focus on one rock and the grass around it. Once I lasso tool out the shapes of the rocks, I quickly find out that the leaf brushes are actually, ironically, the ones that convey the texture of the rock the best. And when I decide to do the grass, I basically use the same technique that I use with the portraits by blocking in, smudging, and then refining the lights. And as soon as I feel that I understand how the rock behaves, what it looks like, how to get the cracks right, what value we are in when we work with the highlights and the mids and the shadows, that's when I start to work on my own image with a new reference that gives me the shape that I desire. I quickly become very insecure, however, because I do not know how to create a shape that he can still walk on. So I decide to simplify the rocks like steps. I'm also aware that I still haven't had made space for the dog to walk on, and I was still not sure where I wanted the dog to be, so I had to make, well, a plane that is easy to run or walk on, and it doesn't look like the dog is about to fall when it approaches the end. So the stones, well, they changed the shape in a way where I am certain that you wouldn't find rocks like these in that area of Austria. You will notice the background, the trees that are very, very close to the cliff. They don't give a sense of big danger. It feels like his fall wouldn't be that big. So later on, I'm going to change that and have the river be right under the rock. I'm just changing the topology of the whole environment to make it more suitable for the fear that it has to instill in the viewer for the poor guy that might be falling off a cliff. And I say might be falling off a cliff because we still want to be optimistic about this card and hope for the best. As I mentioned earlier, I feel very stiff in how I'm painting the dog, and I feel very reliant on my reference. So I decide that my next study is going to involve learning how to paint a dog just anatomically correctly without worrying too much about the reference. My boyfriend suggested that I should have the dog tug on his leg in fear or in knowledge that this man would kill himself if he walks any further. In the original, the dog is just as excited as the man, and I was a bit hesitant to follow his art direction. However, because everything felt so stiff to me already, I decided to give in and add a puppy that is concerned for his owner. And it gives it some more personality and maybe happiness when you look at it. Anyhow, so you can see that I started with a gesture line with a very simple block in a drawing, and then I blocked in the value, and then, well, I worked the fur on top. The second one was trickier because I was working with white fur. So getting shadows in white fur, having the fur not being lit directly, was a huge learning experience. Also, painting the dog's faces, the snouts, the eyes, the ears, all of this was extremely helpful and immediately saved in my visual bank. As soon as I feel comfortable in knowing how to paint a dog the way I want to see it, I start going back to my tarot card and refine this little puppy that I have over there. He's so cute. I really like what I did there. It doesn't happen very often that, I pat myself on the shoulder for a creation that, is just out of my imagination but still feels so real and relatable. I am very aware of how the material has to play along physically correctly, and I always keep my eye on the reference, and I'm very thankful that I found this high resolution image of socks where you can even see the fabric up closely. It's better to have too much information in your reference, visual information in your reference, than too little. When I'm painting the clouds in the background, I'm really, really not sure how they interact with the lighting, this indirect lighting that comes from above the mountains, slightly above the mountains. I have the saturated sky right on top of my cloud bank, and I'm wondering if these clouds would reflect that saturation the way water would, or if the clouds would simply reflect the light that comes from outside of the image. So I stick with something in between. Also, you will notice that I finally changed the topology of the closer part of the background. The trees aren't right by the cliff anymore, and the cliff is separated from the background through the river. So now the image or the jump or the walk looks much more dangerous and final. I also moved the man more into the middle just for composition reasons, and it gave the little puppy the opportunity to show his bum to everyone, which was a little bit of a fear factor to me because I didn't, I didn't want it to look uncomfortable. But thanks to reference, I figured it out. I I am a huge fan of rim light. And well, painting roses is easy, however there are certain things that makes it a bit tricky, like the shadows in between the leaves are quite saturated, and I had to make sure it looks good. Also, the petals was a suggestion of my boyfriend's to add more dynamic to the image and depth, something that I didn't dare to do because I was very, very strict with myself to follow my reference from the original. However, I think the best thing one can do when following reference is using it as advice, but you can always build on top of it. It's just the first layer. Everything that comes afterwards is the personal touch that makes it so much more special. Because these cards are not only about making things 3D and more realistic, they're about putting your own spin into it, making them more relatable in these modern times. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you learned something from it. And if you would, like to see more of them, I will post one every week. If you found this video to be valuable, please give it a thumbs up so more people can see it and let the algorithm know that this channel exists. Thank you so much.